In today's video, I'm going to be going over a very popular dividend stock, and this dividend stock may be one of the best dividend companies of all time. If someone were to ask me if I could only hold one stock, which would you choose? This probably would be that stock. It has everything you can ask for in a dividend stock: a great yield, a good growing dividend over time, and also great capital appreciation. So I'm going to be going over the company, how it operates, its dividend, and how it performed throughout its history. And remember, if you do enjoy content like this, give this video a like and subscribe for future content if you already haven't. Now, it's possible you all already knew what this stock was based on the thumbnail. It is a very popular logo, and of course, because it is one of the most popular stocks in the United States. The company that I'm speaking about is PepsiCo Inc., or Pepsi for short. It has an extremely long history, and it is again, one of the most famous companies out there. A little bit about its dividend to start off, of course, because as dividend investors, that is one of the first things we look at. The company does have a good yield of about 3.03%, which is a very solid dividend yield. It's not too high and not too low. It is basically mid-tier as far as dividends go, and it is a great staple for a diversified portfolio in general, or a company that you may just want to hold alone. Now, as far as the dividend growth rate goes, over the past 5 years, it has grown on average 6.40%, which is also pretty mid-tier, but it is also pretty solid growth over time if you do hold this stock for a long time. And this company does have an extremely long dividend growth rate, really long time, and it is probably one of these stocks that has grown its dividend the longest among other dividend companies. Payout ratio is also pretty solid. It is not paying that high of a dividend in regard to its payout ratio. Pretty modest, so the company does definitely have some use of its money other than just paying out total in dividends. So if it wants to expand its operations, they definitely do have the cash flow to do that. Dividend frequency is quarterly, of course, as with many popular dividend stocks in general. And overall, decent yield, decent growth rate, good payout ratio, and a great dividend growth history. And I'm going to show you a rough overview of its dividend growth over time from the NASDAQ page. As I do go further back, you will see this dividend get smaller and smaller, and that is because it is growing over time. So you do definitely see increases, but I am just going to show you how consistently that dividend grew over time. Every single year, you pretty much do have a decent dividend increase, and of course, in earlier years, it did grow its dividend a little bit faster, but you do, of course, see the great dividend increase over time. Going back as far as the NASDAQ page allows us to, you see that in September 2000, it paid a dividend of 14 cents per share, and then since then, it has only increased. It has not experienced one dividend decrease throughout this time, and that is, I think, pretty interesting considering, of course, it went through the 2008-2009 recession, the decrease from the pandemic that we had in 2020, and throughout all of that, whether it be a trade war, a pandemic, a recession, the dividend never decreased over time. It had only increased. Just goes to show you how this company is committed to increasing the dividend over time and just performing well, paying out its shareholders that great dividend with increasing dividend appreciation over time. A little bit about PepsiCo Inc. itself. So from the website of PepsiCo.com, it considers itself a global leader in convenience foods and beverages. PepsiCo products are enjoyed by consumers more than 1 billion times a day and in more than 200 countries and territories around the world. The company has generated a revenue of $91 billion in 2023. The product line is pretty diverse. Many of these products I'm sure everybody's heard of: Lay's, Doritos, Cheetos, Gatorade, Pepsi-Cola, Mountain Dew, Quaker, and SodaStream. And it goes well beyond that, but it is basically just a decent overview of what this company supplies. So this company basically has its products in almost every single country on earth, and it generates substantial revenue of $91 billion in 2023. Very good, big, large company that is widely recognized throughout the world. So this is going to be a general overview of all of its brands. Of course, most people know Pepsi, but they don't think of all of the brands it offers. It is also a food supply company, and a lot of people don't know that are basically just consumers that think that Pepsi only supplies Pepsi and maybe other drinks, but they don't understand that a lot of the food, convenience foods that they eat from grocery stores or from gas stations or from Pepsi themselves, things like Doritos, Cheetos, Fritos, those are all going to be PepsiCo products. And that is a great thing, considering that something like Coca-Cola really doesn't offer that. They're mainly a drink company. So Pepsi offers more product diversity than something like Coca-Cola. And you see that it does offer a wide number of drinks and snacks for consumption, and its brands are pretty much, again, very diverse and pretty much all well known. You see things like Tostitos, Smart Food popcorn. I think they do bottle beverages for Starbucks, which is why that is there. Sun Chips, Rose Rolled Gold, which I think are pretzels, Rockstar Energy, Quaker Oats, of course, Pepsi, that is pretty much the most widely known one. Ruffles. You see also things like juices like Ocean Spray, Lay's, Lipton Tea, Mountain Dew, and of course, like we said before, Fritos, Doritos, probably one of their more other widely known food products. Gatorade is also there, Aquafina for water, and Brisk, which is I think a tea type of drink. Again, very diverse product list, and it even offers a more diverse range of products than something like Coca-Cola does. So pretty much can't go wrong with its product selection. I think customers will always be buying these treats, especially since they pretty much are on the shelves of every single store out there, convenience store. You will generally see a lot of people have these products of Pepsi in their shopping carts. So let's take a look at this company's performance. How did it perform over time? So what I did was I paired it up against Coca-Cola, again, another major competitor. And this back test is going to go from January 1999 to March 2024. Really long 25-year history just to see how these companies performed throughout recessions or whatever type of market environment that you can think of during that time, and also how they performed compared to each other. And you will see that PepsiCo Inc. absolutely blew away Coca-Cola by a large number. You basically see that it outperformed by twice that amount. And it also had a better best year, a lower max drawdown. It did have a slightly worst year, but it is almost a rounding error at that point. And I think that this is very interesting because most people would think, well, Coca-Cola would perform even better because they're bigger, but I think Pepsi probably had a lot more room to grow in general because it wasn't such a big company back then. And also at the same time, it also has a much more diverse product selection than Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola really focuses on the drink segment, while Pepsi pretty much focuses on both the drink and food segment. It has an ability to get revenue from other places, and of course, getting revenue, if it's a very well-run business, you can get more income, which investors love, and you'll see that increase in share price corresponding to that increase in income and revenue. So you see that Pepsi pretty much outperformed Coca-Cola for all of this time in general. So again, just goes to show you how much better this company performed than its nearest competitor probably. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is pit it up against the S&P 500 because that is pretty much a benchmark that everybody uses to gauge their investments. Okay, so pretty much same thing. What I did was I put it up against SPY, which is the spider ETF that tracks the S&P 500. And this goes for the same length of time from January 1999 to March 2024. And what we see is that Pepsi even outperformed the S&P 500 during that time by a pretty substantial amount. Had you have put 10,000 in both, your investment would have grown more in Pepsi by about $13,000. Now, of course, as you would expect, sometimes Pepsi's standard deviation is a bit higher because it is a standard holding, so it might be slightly more volatile over time, but also at the same time, you do see a lower worst year in the S&P 500, and you also do see a lower max drawdown in S&P 500, despite the PepsiCo stock standard deviation being slightly higher. Now, this might be like a rolling standard deviation or calculated almost on a month-to-month or day-to-day basis, while these max drawdowns might be a little bit more representative of how this stock or ETF performs over time. You do see that PepsiCo definitely did hold up in worse times better than the S&P 500, which I think is pretty surprising in itself, considering that the S&P 500 is even more diversified in itself. Now, I don't want to have you all believe that this is always going to be how it's going to be. Just because PepsiCo outperformed during this time frame, it doesn't mean that that's how it's always going to be. And in fact, if I probably select a different time frame, the results may be a little bit different, and I am just going to throw a different time frame in just to see how it performed throughout different time frames. Yeah, so instead of that 25-year history, I did a 20-year history. Had you have invested in 2004 instead of 1999, the S&P would have outperformed Pepsi throughout that time span by about $5,000 or so. Everything else pretty much remains the same. Pepsi still had a lower worst year, or rather maybe a better worst year, and it also had a better max drawdown. Now, the interesting thing is throughout that time, Pepsi still outperformed most of the time compared to the S&P 500. And in fact, it was only until about the previous 6 months or so to the past 8 months that Pepsi wasn't outperforming the S&P 500. That change came pretty recently. So again, this isn't like a one-to-one comparison. It may not be that Pepsi is always going to be outperforming the S&P 500, or the S&P 500 is always going to be outperforming Pepsi. But I think that Pepsi does show an interesting thing where it outperforms the S&P 500 for the most part over time, at least throughout our back testing history. So I hope that did give you a good overview of why PepsiCo Inc. is a great stock, and maybe you already own it in your portfolio or are considering buying it. I know this stock is pretty much a staple in many dividend ETFs. I know it is in VIG. I know it is one of the top holdings of SCHD, and you'll also see it on other popular dividend ETFs like VYM. So this stock is pretty much everywhere in dividend ETFs, of course, because it is a solid company with a great growth history. Remember, if you did enjoy this content, give this video a like, and if you haven't subscribed already, please do subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate it, and you could stay tuned for future content. And everybody, I'll see you in the next video.